Under the stillness of the English countryside, in the damp chill of the late 18th century, a silent revolution was taking place, not in parliaments, nor in the clanging mills of the Industrial Revolution, but beneath the patient hands of a man dissecting the veins of the natural world. His name was Joseph Banks, and his legacy was not forged through conquest or invention, but through curiosity, the unrelenting hunger to see, to touch, and to understand. It is the story of discovery before the internet, before flight, and before photography. When the world was still shrouded in mystery and every coastline, every plant, every bird carried the possibility of rewriting human knowledge. This is the story of how a single voyage on a wooden ship called the Endeavour opened an empire to the farthest reaches of the earth, and how one man's fascination with nature helped reshape the map of the world. Joseph Banks was born into luxury. His father, a wealthy landowner, had estates sprawling across Lincolnshire, yet wealth did not breed laziness in him. As a young man, Banks was far from the image of a powdered aristocrat. He preferred swamps to drawing rooms, moss to politics, and insects to idle conversation. At Eton and later at Oxford, he studied the new sciences of botany and natural history, disciplines that were considered quaint compared to the booming fields of mathematics and philosophy. But Banks saw beauty and power in what others dismissed as trivial. Plants, he realized, were the architecture of empires. They fed armies, drove trade, cured disease, and symbolized dominion over nature itself. It was an age when exploration was becoming the new theater of competition. Britain and France were locked not just in wars of armies, but wars of discovery. Each sought to outmap, outchart, and outcollect the marvels of the world. To explore was to wield prestige, and Banks, in his early 20s, was determined to make his mark not in politics or battle, but in exploration. When he heard that the Royal Navy planned to send a ship into the remote Pacific to observe the rare transit of Venus, a celestial event that could help calculate the distance between Earth and the Sun, he saw an opening that went far beyond astronomy. He petitioned the Admiralty, spent a fortune of his own money to join the expedition, and recruited a small entourage of scientists and artists to accompany him. His goal was not simply to measure a star, but to explore a planet. In August of 1768, His Majesty's bark Endeavour set sail from Plymouth under the command of Lieutenant James Cook, an experienced but relatively unknown navigator from Yorkshire. For Banks, the voyage was an undertaking of wonder and endurance. The ship was small, barely 30 meters long, and crammed with nearly 100 men, provisions, equipment, and his own assortment of plant presses, jars, and specimen drawers. Whale oil lamps flickered against the wooden beams, and the air reeked of salt, sweat, and rum. Rats scurried in the shadows. Yet amid this chaotic floating world, Banks was feverishly alive. Each sunrise was a promise of something the world had never seen. Their first major stop was the now famous island of Tahiti. To Europeans, it was paradise incarnate. Banks was mesmerized by the lushness of the land, trees heavy with fruit, flowers that seemed to glow in the tropical sun, and an ocean that shimmered like glass. But it was the people who astonished him most, Polynesians whose lives seemed in perfect rhythm with the world around them. Banks recorded their customs, their tools, their dances. He collected plants, insects, shells, and stories with equal enthusiasm. His notes mixed scientific description with a kind of poetic awe, capturing the sensual strangeness of a world few Europeans had imagined so vividly. For 3 months, the Endeavour's crew observed the transit of Venus and repaired the ship, but Banks was already looking beyond the horizon. He had heard tales of a great southern continent, Terra Australis Incognita, rumored to lie far below the known world, a colossal unseen landmass balancing the continents of the north. When Cook received orders to search for it, Banks' excitement was electric. Here was the opportunity to step into the truly unknown. The ship turned south, bracing against furious seas, before striking east toward the continent that would soon reshape the map, Australia. On April 29, 1770, Cook's journal recorded their first landing on the coast of what he named Botany Bay, known to its indigenous inhabitants as Kamai. The name came from Banks himself, who was captivated by the abundance of plant life there. He and his assistant, the Swedish naturalist Daniel Solander, moved along the shore collecting specimens by the hundreds, their hands stained green from crushed leaves and pollen. They found species unlike any in Europe: delicate ferns, flowering shrubs, towering eucalyptus, strange marsupials skittering among the rocks. Every evening, the ship's cabin was transformed into a laboratory of discovery, the air rich with the smell of drying petals and ink. Yet the wonder of discovery was shadowed by misunderstanding. The Endeavour's arrival was not a blank moment. The indigenous people they encountered watched the strange ship from a distance, spears in hand. To Banks, they seemed like ghosts from a forgotten Eden, naked, finely made, their hair black and shining. But to those people, these newcomers were intruders. When Cook's men tried to approach, stones were thrown, and gunfire answered. The clash was small but symbolic. Two worlds had met, not in dialogue, but in a volley of musket smoke. Banks recorded the encounter with detached curiosity, his notes hinting at wonder, sympathy, and obliviousness all at once. He was a man of science, but also the child of empire, and the lands he described so lovingly would soon be claimed in the name of the British Crown. The voyage continued northward along Australia's coast, then across the treacherous reefs of what would later be called the Great Barrier Reef. At one point, the Endeavour ran aground, nearly destroyed. The crew labored for days to free and repair her, patching the hull with oakum and sails. Banks, even amid the chaos, refused to abandon his scientific work. He sketched and documented coral formations, treating disaster as another form of learning. It was this blend of tenacity and curiosity that defined him. By the time the Endeavour returned to England in 1771, nearly 3 years after its departure, Banks had changed from an eager young gentleman into a national celebrity. His collection was immense: over 30,000 plant specimens, thousands of preserved animals, shells, and minerals, hundreds of drawings and ethnographic items, everything from Polynesian garments to weapons and tools. He had, in essence, brought back a new world. The Enlightenment was hungry for new knowledge, and Banks's discoveries fed that appetite. The newspapers hailed him, the scientific community admired him, and King George III invited him to his private gardens. Banks had become not just a botanist, but the face of discovery itself. But celebrity did not satisfy him. The world, after all, was still vast, and Banks envisioned something grand: the systematic uniting of science and empire. He believed that knowledge and power could work hand in hand. Plants could move between continents like ambassadors, breadfruit from Tahiti to feed enslaved people in the West Indies, tea from China to India, wheat from Britain to Australia. Each transplantation would reshape economies, diets, and destinies. The British Empire would be not only a political empire, but a biological one, a living web stretching across the globe. This vision made him one of the most influential figures in late 18th and early 19th century science. As president of the Royal Society, a position he held for over 40 years, Banks turned what had once been a gentleman's club into the beating heart of the global scientific network. He advised kings and captains, explorers and farmers, merchants and scholars. The ideas that began in his journals aboard the Endeavour rippled outward, influencing colonial policy, trade routes, and agricultural systems around the world. Yet his legacy is not unblemished. Banks' work is entwined with the expansion of empire, with all its consequences. The same voyages that mapped and classified the natural world also paved the way for colonization and dispossession. The native lands whose flora he catalogued were soon taken, their people displaced, their ecosystems transformed. The discovery of these places in European eyes masked the deep, ancient knowledge of the indigenous peoples who had lived there for millennia. Banks, for all his brilliance, seldom recognized that. To him, the people he met were subjects of fascination but not equals in knowledge. His passion for order, to name, to catalog, to own, echoed the imperial impulse of the age. Still, to judge him by modern values alone is to miss the complexity of his world. Banks lived in a time when science and empire grew together, when curiosity was both a noble pursuit and an instrument of control. He was driven by wonder, but his wonder had consequences. As his influence grew, so did his network of explorers. He encouraged young officers like William Bligh, who would later command the infamous Bounty, and supported the early surveying voyages that would map Australia and the South Pacific. He corresponded with naturalists across the continents, advising on everything from the cultivation of cotton in India to the design of Kew Gardens, which he transformed into a living library of global flora. Kew became more than a royal garden. It became the greenhouse of empire, a repository where plants from around the world could be studied, hybridized, and redistributed. Banks' interest extended into every dimension of the natural world. He advised on the draining of swamps, the management of colonial agriculture, even on attempts to introduce useful species to new environments, efforts that today we might recognize as early experiments in globalization. Some of those attempts succeeded, others brought ecological chaos, but in all of them, Banks saw a thread connecting humanity to the living earth, however imperfectly. He remained a central figure through the tumult of his century: the American Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, the rise and fall of fortunes. Through it all, he cultivated an almost priestly devotion to inquiry. Visitors to his London home described rooms filled with specimens, maps, and fossils, a household that doubled as a laboratory and salon. Even in old age, his mind did not rest. He suffered from gout, and his movements grew painful, but he continued to correspond with scientists around the world. To the very end, he dreamed of new expeditions, new seeds, new frontiers. When he died in 1820, Sir Joseph Banks was honored as Britain's greatest naturalist, President of the Royal Society, Knight of the Bath, advisor to kings, patron of explorers. But his truest legacy was this: the idea that knowledge itself could be mapped like a continent, that curiosity could be as powerful as conquest. He helped create a vision of the world as one vast, interconnected globe, a place where no corner remained mysterious for long, and where the pursuit of understanding could quite literally reshape the earth. We might imagine him, even now, aboard the Endeavour, the sea stretching endlessly around him. The deck creaks, the sails snap in the wind. Banks leans over the rail, specimen jar in hand, the salt air cool on his face. Before him lies a coastline unseen by European eyes, ancient and infinite. To him, it is not a wilderness to be feared, but a library to be read. Every fern, every shell, every bird call carries meaning. He does not yet know that the names and drawings he will make here will seep into the cartography of empire. He knows only the thrill of seeing and naming, of adding one more piece to the grand mosaic of human knowledge. Yet there is something poignant in this image. Behind the optimism of discovery is the shadow of loss, the idea that in labeling, in claiming, something of the mystery is gone. The indigenous knowledge that had grown for thousands of years would be disregarded, swept aside in favor of the European taxonomy. The natural world that seemed endless would soon begin to feel finite, its resources catalogued and exploited. Banks' story, then, is the story of humanity's double-edged genius, our endless curiosity, and our endless appetite. But for a moment, let us linger in that first flush of discovery, when the world still seemed to unfold like a scroll, each day revealing a new wonder. Earth was still larger than our imagination. The Endeavour's crew did not know what tomorrow's sunrise would bring. They lived with uncertainty as their companion, and wonder as their compass. What drove men like Banks to risk everything for knowledge? It was not wealth, he already had that. It was not fame, he could not have known he would find it. It was something subtler, the desire to stand on the edge of the known world and push a little farther, to bear witness to the universe's hidden patterns. In that sense, his spirit lives on.
Every satellite, every probe sent into deep space, every genetic sequence unraveled carries the same pulse of discovery that moved him across the Pacific centuries ago.
The legacy of Joseph Banks reminds us that history is not just the story of battles and kings. It is also the story of how we learned to see, to look closely, to record, to connect. The modern world, wired and mapped and named, began with men and women who carried notebooks into jungles and deserts, who traded comfort for curiosity. They gave us more than facts. They gave us a way of asking questions, a way of believing that the unknown could be known. As the Endeavour sailed homeward in 1771, its hull scarred, its sails patched, Banks stood on deck, gazing westward into the reddening sky. Behind him lay thousands of miles of sea, countless discoveries, friendships and losses, and ahead home, London, recognition. He had circled the world, but in some deeper way, the world had circled him. It had shaped him, shown him his place within it, a single mind among millions, each connected by the same planetary web of life. He could not have known how deeply those connections would resonate centuries later, how his plants from Botany Bay would populate European greenhouses, how the drawings from Tahiti would inspire generations of artists and naturalists, how the maps that grew from Cook's and Banks' voyage would recalibrate the imagination of empires. Nor could he foresee the darker legacies, the environmental transformations, the cultural erasures that would follow. History, after all, is never pure discovery. It is always shadowed by what is lost. But if we listen carefully to the story of Joseph Banks, we can glimpse something enduring and necessary. The belief that wonder itself can be a force for progress, that to kneel before a flower and study its petals is, in its own quiet way, an act of reverence for the world. That curiosity, for all its dangers, remains one of the most human of virtues. Even now, centuries later, the specimens Banks collected are preserved in the Natural History Museum in London, their petals pressed like fragments of time. Each label, handwritten in brown ink, carries a story. Where it was found, what it was called, who touched it first. His notebooks, too, survive, pages crowded with precise sketches and feverish observations. Reading them feels like stepping aboard the Endeavour again, smelling the salt and resin, hearing the creak of timbers, feeling the tremor of anticipation before landfall. You can almost hear his voice in the scratch of the quill, steady, curious, unrelenting. And perhaps that is the heart of history itself. It is not dead facts, but living memory. The fragile attempt to reach across centuries and feel what others felt, to see through their eyes, if only for a moment. Joseph Banks saw a world brimming with life, infinite in its variety. His story invites us to see it that way too, before our eyes grow dull with familiarity. In his lifetime, Banks helped redraw maps, replant continents, and reshape science. But his most profound achievement was to remind humanity that knowledge begins with attention, with the courage to look closely at the world and say, "I see." Through him, we can sense how the Enlightenment's faith in reason was also a faith in wonder, how exploration was both a journey outward and inward, revealing not only new lands but new ways of understanding ourselves. The voyage of the Endeavour ended more than 2 centuries ago, but the questions it raised still sail with us. What drives us to explore? What do we discover? And what do we destroy in the act of discovery? For every new horizon we chase, there are stories waiting in the waves, stories of beauty, of loss, of connection. So imagine, once more, the scene. The ocean wide and empty, the stars like ancient guides above, the ship slicing forward through the moonlit surf. Banks is on deck again, quill in hand, his notebook open to a blank page. The air hums with the promise of revelation. A new day is dawning, and with it, the endless curiosity that defines our species. He writes the date, notes the wind, and looks out to the horizon where sky meets sea, knowing that to explore is never merely to find new lands, but to find new eyes with which to see them.